The final signature on the document felt less like an ending and more like the pulling of a trigger. Clara looked at her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, Alex, with an expression of triumphant pity. She had won. In her mind, the victory was absolute, a clean sweep that would excise this mild, disappointingly average man from her life, leaving her with all the assets that truly mattered. The house in the affluent suburbs, the art collection curated by her mother, the network of powerful friends she had inherited from her father, and most satisfyingly, the boat. The Sea Dancer, a vessel that represented everything she valued: leisure, status, and a tangible measure of success. She had been generous, she told herself. She'd let him keep his car, a sensible and entirely unimpressive sedan. She'd let him have his personal effects, his books, his clothes. And she'd even let him keep the pile of junk in the garage. For years, that corner had been occupied by what Alex called his project, a hulking mass of machined steel, polished aluminum, and coiled copper wiring that he tinkered with in his spare time. He called it an engine. To Clara and her family, it was a monument to his failed ambitions, a bizarre sculpture of wasted weekends and deferred dreams. During the asset division, her lawyer had contemptuously listed it as scrap metal garage, with an estimated value of zero. Alex hadn't even contested it. He simply nodded, his face calm, almost serene. That serenity irritated her more than any argument could have. It was the quiet acceptance of a man who knew he was beaten. Clara thought she had taken everything of value. She didn't know that the old engine she had so disdainfully left behind was not an engine at all. It was a prototype, the culmination of 5 years of silent, intensive labor. It was a revolutionary kinetic energy reclamation core, a piece of architectural technology so advanced it was poised to redefine sustainable building. And it wasn't just a concept, it was a commission piece. Within 24 hours, the final payment for that pile of junk would clear, and Alex's bank account would increase by a sum that would not just eclipse, but utterly vaporize the value of the boat, the house, and everything else Clara had so proudly claimed. The engine wasn't a symbol of his failure, it was the engine of his liberation, and its price was not zero. The final installment alone was $890,000. We're about to dive deep into a story about hidden worth, quiet dignity, and the moment when the underestimated finally show their hand. It's a journey of frustration, vindication, and ultimate wisdom. Before we begin, if you love stories where patience and integrity win the day, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And I'm always curious, where in the world are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. Now, let's get back to the quiet garage and the storm that was about to break. The silence in the house after Clara left was a physical presence. It filled the spaces where her laughter, her criticisms, and her constant, restless energy used to be. Alex walked through the echoing rooms, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floors. He ran a hand along the cool marble of the kitchen island, a feature Clara had insisted upon, a centerpiece for the many parties where he had often felt like a guest in his own home. He wasn't sad. The emotion that settled over him was something far more complex, a slow, deep, calming clarity. It was the feeling of a pressure valve being released after years of being tightened, turn by painful turn. He ended his tour in the garage. The boat was gone, of course. The massive empty space it left seemed to amplify the garage's emptiness. But in the corner, under a heavy canvas tarp, sat his life's real work. He pulled back the cover. Light from the single bare bulb overhead glinted off the meticulously polished surfaces of the prototype. To the untrained eye, it was a chaotic assembly of parts, but to Alex, it was a symphony of engineering. Each component, from the smallest gear to the largest flywheel, was the result of thousands of hours of design, calculation, and fabrication. He had built it himself, piece by piece, in the quiet hours of the night, a secret project hidden in plain sight. His mind drifted back, not with fondness, but with the detached analysis of an architect reviewing a flawed blueprint. He remembered the early days with Clara. He had been a junior architect then, full of ideas and a quiet passion for his craft. She was the daughter of Richard Sterling, a titan of real estate development, a man who built empires of glass and steel and valued things only by their price tag. Clara was his father's daughter, polished, confident, and accustomed to a world where worth was displayed, not nurtured. She was drawn to Alex's creativity, she'd said. She found his quiet intensity intriguing. But intrigue had quickly curdled into impatience. His path to success was too slow for her, too subtle. He wasn't a flashy deal-maker like her brother Marcus, or a ruthless executive like her father. He was a creator, a man who found joy in the elegant solution to a complex problem, not in the boisterous celebration of a signed contract. Her family had never understood him. They saw his humility as weakness, his patience as a lack of ambition. At family dinners, Richard would hold court, booming about his latest acquisition, the millions made, the rivals crushed. He would then turn to Alex, a dismissive smile on his face. "And what about you, Alex? Still drawing your pretty little pictures?" The question was always framed as a joke, but the condescension was the point. Marcus would snicker. Clara's mother, Eleanor, would offer a tight, sympathetic smile that was somehow more insulting than the question itself. And Clara would remain silent. Her silence was the deepest cut. It was a failure to defend, a quiet alignment with her family's judgment. She was the silent enabler, the one who would squeeze his hand under the table after the insult, a gesture not of support, but of placation, as if to say, "Just endure it, this is the price of being with me." He remembered the day he'd first tried to explain the project to Richard. He had unrolled the initial schematics on the dining room table, his hands trembling slightly with excitement. "It's a kinetic reclamation system," he'd explained, his voice full of the passion he rarely showed them. "It captures the ambient energy in a building, from elevators, HVAC systems, even the movement of people, and converts it back into usable electricity. It could reduce a skyscraper's energy consumption by up to 40%. Richard had stared at the intricate drawings for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he had looked up, not at the schematics, but at Alex. "So, it's a fancy generator?" he'd asked, his voice flat. "It's more than that," Alex had insisted. "It's a closed-loop ecosystem. It's—" "Son," Richard had interrupted, placing a heavy hand on Alex's shoulder. "Let me give you some advice. People don't pay for complicated. They pay for big. They pay for shiny. Forget these toys. You want to make real money? Come work for me. I'll teach you how to build things people actually want." He'd rolled up the blueprints and handed them back to Alex, a gesture of final, undisguised dismissal. Alex had looked at Clara, hoping for a word of defense, a flicker of belief in her eyes. He found none. She just gave him a small, apologetic shrug. The message was clear. Her father had spoken. The matter was closed. From that day on, his project became a family joke. "How's the perpetual motion machine, Alex?" Marcus would ask at holiday gatherings. "Solve the world's energy crisis from your garage yet?" Each jab was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but together they had bled the warmth from the relationship. He stopped talking about it. He moved the work into the shadows, a secret act of defiance. The more they mocked it, the more he poured himself into it. The project became his refuge, the one place where his ideas were not subject to their cynical appraisal. The garage was his sanctuary. He gently ran a microfiber cloth over the device's central housing, the polished steel cool beneath his fingers. He felt a pang, not of anger, but of a deep, resonant sorrow for the man he had been. The man who had tried so hard to win the approval of people who were incapable of giving it. He had wanted them to see him, to understand the value of his work, the depth of his passion. He had learned, slowly and painfully, that they were blind to anything that didn't glitter. Their world was built on surfaces, and he was a man of substance. A soft chime from his phone broke the silence. It was a message from his lawyer, a man named Ben Carter, who was as methodical and understated as Alex himself. The message was simple. "They've filed the final acceptance. It's done. Are you ready for tomorrow?" Alex looked from the phone to the magnificent machine in front of him. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, but it was also a moral mirror. Soon, it would reflect back at Clara and her family the truth of their own blindness. He typed his reply. "Ready." He then switched off the garage light, plunging the machine back into shadow. It sat in the darkness, a quiet, patient beast waiting for the dawn. The quiet before the storm had officially ended. The weeks leading up to the final mediation had been a masterclass in humiliation, orchestrated by Clara and her family with the precision of a corporate takeover. The assault was twofold: social and legal. Socially, Clara had moved swiftly to consolidate their shared world, recasting their history with her as the vibrant, long-suffering wife chained to a dull, unambitious man. Lunches were had, tearful phone calls were made, and the narrative took hold among their circle of friends. Alex found himself quietly ostracized, his invitations to gatherings rescinded, his calls met with awkward excuses. He was being erased. Legally, the attack was more direct. Clara had hired the most notoriously aggressive divorce attorney in the city, a shark named Lawrence Adler, whose strategy was simple: overwhelm and intimidate. The initial filing was a work of fiction, painting Alex as a financial drain, a man who had failed to contribute meaningfully to the marital estate. It was a breathtakingly cynical document. His steady income as a senior architect at a reputable firm was framed as a modest salary, while Clara's inherited wealth and trust fund distributions were presented as the sole pillars supporting their lifestyle. The deposition was the nadir. It was held in Adler's intimidatingly modern office, a space of cold glass and black leather that felt designed to make people feel small. Alex sat on one side of a vast mahogany table with his lawyer, Ben. On the other side sat Clara, flanked by Adler, and to Alex's surprise, her father Richard and her brother Marcus. They weren't legally required to be there. Their presence was a power play, a show of force. Adler began, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. He went through Alex's career, his promotions, his salary. With every question, he would pause and look at Richard, a silent, sycophantic gesture. "So, Mr. Hayes," Adler said, leaning forward, "in 10 years at a respectable, if not top-tier firm, your salary has increased by a mere 40%. Is that correct?" "It's a competitive salary for my role and experience," Alex replied, his voice even. Adler smirked. "Competitive? My client in that same 10-year period has seen her personal portfolio, managed by her father, increase by 400%. Do you see the disparity, Mr. Hayes?" "I see two different financial structures," Alex said calmly. "One is earned income. The other is investment from pre-existing capital." Marcus snorted from beside his father. "It's called making money, Alex. You should try it sometime." Alex ignored him, keeping his eyes on Adler. The lawyer then turned to their assets. The house, purchased with a down payment from Richard. The cars, the art. Each item was methodically credited to Clara's side of the ledger. Alex felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the dull ache of being systematically diminished. He glanced at Clara. She wouldn't meet his gaze. She was staring at a point on the wall just over his shoulder, her expression a careful mask of detached boredom. She was a spectator at his dissection. Then came the moment he had been anticipating. Adler flipped a page in his file. "And finally," he said, the word dripping with theatrical disdain, "we have this. Item 7B on the asset list. The project." He looked up at Alex, a cruel glint in his eye. Can you describe for the record, Mr. Hayes, what this project is? The room was silent. Alex could feel Richard and Marcus leaning forward, hungry for the entertainment. It's a piece of engineering I've been developing, Alex said. Engineering, Adler repeated, tasting the word. And what is its purpose, this machine? It's a kinetic energy reclamation core. Adler exchanged a look with Richard, who was barely suppressing a grin. I see. And does this device have a current market value? This was the moment, the pivot point. Alex could feel Ben tense slightly beside him. This was his chance to declare its value, to stake his claim. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was not to fight on their turf, not to play their game. The plan was to let them build their own prison. At present, Alex said, his voice measured and clear, it is a non-commercial prototype. It has no established market value. So, it's worthless? Adler pressed. Its value is in its potential, Alex countered softly. Potential doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Hayes, Adler said with a final, dismissive wave of his hand. For the purposes of this division, we are valuing it at its scrap metal price. We've had an estimate, $500. Are you in agreement? Alex looked across the table, past the smug lawyer, past the smirking brother and the contemptuous father-in-law. He looked directly at Clara. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. He offered her one last chance, a silent appeal to her memory of the man she once claimed to love, the man with dreams she once found intriguing. Her eyes were cold, empty. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod to her lawyer. She was endorsing the humiliation. She was signing off on the lie that his life's work was worthless junk. A profound calm washed over Alex. The last flicker of hope for a different outcome, for a shred of decency from her, was extinguished. And in its place, a cold, hard certainty settled in. He had his answer. He turned back to Adler. I am in agreement, he said. The victory in the room was palpable. Richard leaned back, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. Adler smiled, a shark's smile, as he made a note. Clara finally relaxed in her chair, a faint sigh of relief escaping her lips. They had won. They had stripped him down, taken everything, and left him with his pile of worthless junk. They believed they had closed the book on Alex Hayes. They had no idea he was just about to open it. In his pocket, his fingers closed around a small, cool object, a custom-machined titanium bearing, a tiny, perfect component of the worthless machine. It felt like a key. The days that followed the deposition were a study in contrasts. For Clara and her family, it was a period of triumphant celebration and confident planning. For Alex, it was a time of quiet, methodical preparation. While Clara hosted a divorce party on the Sea Dancer, a catered affair for the friends who had chosen her side, Alex was in a sterile conference room, finalizing the most important contract of his life. Clara's confidence was absolute. She saw the outcome of the divorce not just as a financial victory, but as a moral one. She had, in her narrative, freed herself from a marriage that was holding her back. Her father, Richard, was equally pleased. He viewed Alex's quiet compliance as proof of what he'd always believed. The man had no backbone. See, he'd boomed to Marcus over dinner at their exclusive club. Push a weak man and he folds. That's the first rule of business. Alex never understood that. He was always thinking, always drawing, never acting. Marcus, ever his father's echo, agreed enthusiastically. He just sat there and let Adler tear him apart. It was pathetic. And that engine thing, my God. All those years tinkering with that pile of scrap, I almost feel sorry for him. The pity was the most insulting part, a final seasoning of condescension on a meal of contempt. Meanwhile, Alex was acting. His actions just weren't visible to them. He met with the legal team from Croft Industries, the global architectural firm founded by the legendary Julian Croft. Croft was a visionary, A man who had built his empire not on ruthless development, but on groundbreaking, sustainable design. He was everything Richard Sterling wasn't: innovative, principled, and respected not just for his wealth, but for his contribution to the field. Croft had been secretly mentoring Alex for 2 years, ever since Alex had nervously submitted the initial concept for his reclamation corps to a design competition Croft was judging. While other entries were flashy and superficial, Croft had seen the genius in Alex's elegant, ruthlessly efficient design. He had contacted Alex personally, and their collaboration had begun. The prototype in the garage wasn't a hobby. It was the deliverable for the first phase of a multi-million-dollar development deal. The $890,000 was merely the payment for the successful completion and testing of the prototype itself. The real money, licensing fees, royalties, and a partnership stake in a new subsidiary, Croft Kinetic, was still to come. The day before the final mediation, Alex met with Julian Croft himself. They sat in Croft's minimalist office, overlooking the city from the 81st floor of the building he had designed. Croft, a man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of calm authority, reviewed the divorce settlement summary Ben had prepared. He looked up from the papers, his expression one of disbelief. "They valued it at $500? He asked, a rare smile playing on his lips. "The KRC-1? Alex, the raw materials alone cost you over $50,000. Their assessment was based on its appearance, not its function," Alex said quietly. "They see a pile of metal. They don't see the years of research, the software, the patented algorithms that make it work. Their blindness is about to become very, very expensive for them," Croft noted. He slid a folder across the polished desk. "This is the final execution copy of the Phase 2 agreement. It outlines the licensing structure and your new role as Chief Technical Officer of Croft Kinetic. The board approved it this morning. Your compensation package, well, let's just say you won't be worrying about modest salaries anymore." Alex opened the folder. The numbers on the page seemed to shimmer. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation. It was the world's most respected architect telling him that his work, the work that had been mocked and dismissed for years, was not just valuable, but revolutionary. "Thank you, Julian," Alex said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "For believing in it. In me." Croft waved a hand. "Genius doesn't need my belief, Alex. It just needs an opportunity. You created the genius. I'm just providing the opportunity." "Now," he said, his tone shifting from collegial to strategic. "About tomorrow, are you certain about this course of action? You could have declared the asset. It would have been simpler." "Simpler, yes," Alex agreed. "But this was never just about the money. It's about a pattern of behavior. It's about years of being told my work, my passion, my very nature was less than. This is not revenge, Julian. It's a clarification. They built a cage of their own arrogance and condescension. Tomorrow, I'm just going to quietly lock the door." Croft studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Poetic justice. I can appreciate that. Just remember, Alex, after tomorrow, everything changes. They will see you differently. The world will see you differently. Make sure you're ready for that." "I'm ready," Alex said, the words feeling more true than they ever had before. That evening, he went back to the house one last time. It was mostly empty, packed up by movers Clara had hired. He walked into the garage and stood before the KRC-1. He didn't touch it. He just looked at it, this silent partner in his long journey. It had absorbed his frustrations, his hopes, his secret triumphs. It was more than a machine. It was a testament to the idea that true worth is built in the quiet hours, not declared in the loud ones. Tomorrow the quiet hours would be over. It was time to make a statement. The atmosphere in the mediation room was thick with a cloying, self-congratulatory air. It was the final meeting, a formality to sign the papers that would officially end the marriage and ratify the lopsided division of assets. Clara was radiant, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored suit that screamed quiet luxury. She sat beside Lawrence Adler, a picture of poised victory. Her father Richard and brother Marcus were there again, seated slightly behind her like a king and his prince, observing a favorable treaty signing. They were not participants, they were an audience, there to witness the final affirmation of their family's dominance. Alex sat opposite them, with Ben Carter at his side. He was dressed simply, in a well-fitted dark gray suit, his demeanor calm and unreadable. He had slept soundly the night before, a deep and dreamless sleep. The years of anxiety and quiet resentment had finally evaporated, replaced by a crystalline focus. He felt like a chess player who could see the entire board, 10 moves ahead, while his opponent was still celebrating the capture of a pawn. Adler cleared his throat, arranging the stack of documents before him. "Well," he began, a magnanimous smile spreading across his face, "I think we can all agree this has been a challenging process, but I'm pleased we've reached an amicable agreement that allows both parties to move forward. My client has been exceptionally generous, and we are prepared to sign." He slid the settlement agreement across the table. "Mr. Hayes, if you and your counsel would just execute the final signature pages, we can conclude this matter." All eyes turned to Alex. Clara watched him, a hint of impatience in her expression. Richard leaned forward slightly, a proprietary gleam in his eye, as if he were closing a real estate deal. Marcus had his phone out, discreetly placed on his lap, likely ready to text the good news to the rest of the family. Alex did not reach for the pen. Instead, he looked at Ben, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The quiet before the storm was over. This was the first clap of thunder. "We will not be signing this agreement," Alex said. The words were spoken quietly, without drama, but they landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. The air of celebration vanished, replaced by a stunned, confused silence. Adler was the first to recover, his professional smile faltering for a second before being hastily reassembled. I beg your pardon? Mr. Hayes, this is the agreement you consented to, the terms you explicitly accepted in deposition." "I accepted the valuation of the assets as presented," Alex corrected him gently. "I did not, however, agree to finalize a settlement based on what has since been revealed to be incomplete and inaccurate information." Clara stared at him, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Incomplete? What are you talking about, Alex? It's all there. The house, the accounts, everything." "Not everything," Alex said. He slid his own folder onto the center of the table. It was a slim, unassuming black folder, but it sat there like a bomb. "You see, there's the matter of item 7B, the project, the scrap metal in the garage." Marcus let out an incredulous laugh. "Oh, for God's sake, are you really going to hold this up over a pile of junk? We said you could have it, Alex. It's all yours. All $500 worth." Alex's gaze was steady. "That's the incomplete information I was referring to. The valuation was incorrect, not by a little, by a lot." Adler scoffed, regaining his footing. He was on familiar ground now, bullying. "Mr. Hayes, you yourself agreed to the valuation. You are on record. This is a desperate, last-minute tactic, and it will not work. The court will not look kindly on this. The court will look very kindly on the presentation of new, material evidence that was unavailable at the time of deposition," Ben Carter interjected smoothly, speaking for the first time. "And the evidence is, shall we say, significant." Alex opened his folder. He did not pull out a new appraisal or a counteroffer. He pulled out a single, beautifully printed document and placed it on top of the folder. It was the cover page of a contract. The logo at the top was unmistakable, a stylized C intertwined with a globe. Croft Industries. Richard Sterling, who had been watching with detached amusement, suddenly sat bolt upright. He knew that logo. Everyone in his world knew that logo. It was the mark of his greatest rival, not in terms of raw profit, but in terms of prestige and innovation. "What is this?" Clara asked, her voice losing its confident edge. "This," Alex said, his voice remaining perfectly level, "is the purchase and development agreement for the scrap metal in the garage, or, as its proper name is, the Kinetic Reclamation Corps Model 1, the KRC-1. He then slid a second document from the folder. It was a bank statement, a wire transfer confirmation. He placed it next to the contract. "You valued my project at $500, he said, his eyes locking with Clara's. "That was your assessment. This is the assessment of Croft Industries." He tapped a finger on the highlighted number on the page. "This is the final installment payment for the delivery of the prototype. It cleared this morning." The number was there, stark and undeniable. $890,000. A collective gasp seemed to be sucked from the room. Adler's jaw literally dropped. Marcus's phone clattered from his lap onto the floor. Richard Sterling's face, moments before flushed with victory, had gone a pale, chalky white. But Alex's gaze never left Clara. He was forcing her to see, to finally understand. Her face was a canvas of cascading emotions: confusion, disbelief, denial, and then dawning, horrifying comprehension. That's not possible," she stammered, shaking her head. "That thing, it's just junk. You built it in the garage." "Yes, I did," Alex said. "In the evenings, on weekends. The time you thought I was wasting, I was building our future. A different kind of future than the one you wanted." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And this," he added, tapping the bank statement again, "is just the beginning. This is the payment for the hardware. The intellectual property, the patents, the licensing deal, that's a separate matter entirely." The quiet bomb had been dropped. The simple, devastating revelation that changed everything. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed in an instant. The man they had dismissed as a failure, a dreamer, a pathetic afterthought, was now the wealthiest, most powerful person at the table. And they had just signed a document agreeing that his greatest asset was worthless. The trap they had so carefully set for him had just snapped shut on them. The silence that followed Alex's revelation was a vacuum, pulling all the air and arrogance out of the room. For a long, stretched moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The wire transfer statement lay on the table like a verdict, its highlighted number a glowing indictment of their monumental misjudgment. Clara was the first to break. A strangled, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. It wasn't a laugh of humor, but of pure shock. A sound of a mind refusing to process reality. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as if to dislodge the impossible fact. "No, you're lying. This is a trick, some kind of joke." She looked desperately at her father, her lifelong anchor of certainty. "Dad, tell him. This is impossible." Richard Sterling, however, was not looking at Alex. His eyes, the eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime reading contracts and sniffing out opportunities, were glued to the Croft Industries logo on the document. He recognized the typeface, the letterhead, the sheer authenticity of it. He knew this wasn't a bluff. A man like Julian Croft did not participate in jokes. His face was a mask of grim realization. The developer, who prided himself on seeing value where others didn't, had just been proven catastrophically blind. "It's real," he said, his voice a hoarse croak. "The document, it's real." The confirmation from her father seemed to finally break through Clara's denial. The color drained from her face. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the paper to Alex. She was seeing him for the first time, not as the gentle, unassuming man she had married and discarded, but as a stranger, a formidable, strategic opponent who had been hiding in plain sight. But you agreed," she stammered, her voice rising with panic. In the deposition, you said it was worthless. You agreed to $500. No, Alex corrected her again, his tone still maddeningly calm. I said it had no established market value at that time, which was true. The contract wasn't executed yet. I agreed to your valuation of $500, an offer you and your lawyer proposed, which I accepted. He looked at Adler, whose face had gone from smug to sweaty. I believe the legal term for it is estoppel. You can't make a representation, have the other party rely on it, and then change your position. Can you, Mr. Adler? Adler opened and closed his mouth like a fish, no sound coming out. His entire strategy, his entire case, had just been vaporized. He had built his victory on the foundation of Alex's supposed weakness and lack of assets. Now that foundation was revealed to be quicksand. Marcus, finally finding his voice, surged to his feet. "This is fraud," he yelled, his face red with fury. "You deliberately hid this asset. We'll sue you. We'll take everything." Ben Carter, who had been silent and observant until now, finally spoke. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice cutting through Marcus's bluster. Mr. Hayes was asked for a valuation. He gave a truthful answer about its status at that specific moment. We were under no obligation to disclose prospective, unmaterialized business deals. Your side, however, performed its own due diligence. You had the opportunity to inspect the asset. You could have hired an expert, an engineer, to appraise it. You chose not to. You chose to label it scrap metal based on your own assumptions. That is not fraud. That is negligence on your part. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing their outrage and revealing it for what it was, the fury of being outsmarted. The door to the conference room opened. A woman in a sharp suit, an associate from Ben's firm, leaned in. "Mr. Carter? Mr. Croft is here." Richard Sterling's head snapped toward the door. "Julian Croft? Here?" "Yes," Alex said simply. "He's a partner in the project. He wanted to be here to sign the final Phase 2 papers." A moment later, Julian Croft walked in. He exuded an aura of immense, unstated power. He was a legend in their world, a man Richard both envied and feared. Croft's eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene with a quick, analytical glance. He gave a brief, polite nod to the stunned Sterling family and their lawyer, then walked directly to Alex's side of the table. "Alex," he said, his voice warm and resonant, completely ignoring the tension. "Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to drop this off." He placed another folder on the table, this one thicker than Alex's. "The executed Croft Kinetic Partnership Agreement. Congratulations, Mr. Chief Technical Officer." He clapped a hand on Alex's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect and alliance. The arrival of the unexpected ally was the final, crushing blow. It wasn't just a document anymore. It was a living, breathing validation of everything Alex had claimed. Julian Croft, the kingmaker of modern architecture, had just publicly anointed Alex as his peer, his partner. Croft then turned his gaze to Richard. "Richard," he said, his tone now cool and professional, "I was surprised to hear about your involvement in this. I wouldn't have thought a piece of technology this significant would have slipped your notice. It's the most important development in sustainable building in a generation." The words were polite, but the subtext was devastating. You missed it. You, the great deal maker, were blind. Richard looked as if he had been physically struck. This was a humiliation far worse than losing money. This was a public indictment of his judgment, delivered by the one man whose opinion mattered in his world. Clara could only stare. The entire foundation of her life, her father's infallibility, her family's superior judgment, her own perception of value, had crumbled in the span of 10 minutes. She looked at Alex, at the man standing beside the legendary Julian Croft, and she felt a dizzying vertigo. The man she had pitied, the man she had called a failure, was a giant, and she had willingly, happily, thrown him away for a boat. The immediate aftermath was chaos. but a quiet, desperate kind. The bravado and fury from Marcus and Richard evaporated, replaced by the frantic energy of damage control. Lawrence Adler, his face slick with sweat, immediately called for a recess, huddling with his clients in a corner of the room. Their whispers were sharp and panicked, a frantic symphony of blame and disbelief. "How could you let this happen?" Clara hissed at Adler, her voice a venomous whisper. "You're the best. You were supposed to protect me." "Protect you?" Adler shot back, his composure shredded. "Your husband was asked about the asset, and he lied by omission. This is bad faith." "It's not," Richard cut in, his voice heavy with the grim acceptance of a seasoned player who knows when he's been checkmated. "The other lawyer is right. We were negligent. We assumed. I assumed." He looked at his hands, the hands that had built an empire, as if he'd never seen them before. The shame of being so thoroughly outmaneuvered by a man he considered his inferior was a poison spreading through his veins. Julian Croft and Ben Carter had discreetly excused themselves to a neighboring office to give Alex space, leaving him alone at the vast table. He sat in the silence, a calm island in their storm. He didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. He felt a profound sense of release, as if a great weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. He was simply observing the natural consequences of their own actions, the inevitable collapse of a structure built on a faulty foundation of arrogance. After a few minutes, the huddle broke. Clara approached the table, her demeanor utterly transformed. The triumphant queen was gone, replaced by a desperate negotiator. Her face was pale, her eyes pleading. It was a look Alex had never seen on her before, and it stirred nothing in him but a distant pity. "Alex," she began, her voice soft, attempting a familiarity that no longer existed between them. Okay, you made your point. You're brilliant, we get it. We were wrong about the engine, the core, but it's still a marital asset. It was developed during our marriage. That means it's half mine." Alex looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Is it, Clara?" "Of course it is," Adler interjected, striding forward, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. "Any asset acquired or developed during the marriage is community property. That's basic law. The $890,000, the partnership, the future royalties, we're entitled to 50%. Ben Carter chose that moment to re-enter the room, holding a single sheet of paper. "Actually, you're not," he said calmly. He placed the paper on the table in front of Adler. It was a copy of the deposition transcript page they had all been so proud of. "You're referring to this?" Ben said, pointing to a specific section. "Page 47, line 12. Mr. Adler, this is your own statement. For the purposes of this division, we are valuing it at its scrap metal price. We've had an estimate, $500. You then proposed, and Miss Sterling agreed, that in exchange for her taking sole ownership of several other assets, like the boat for instance, Mr. Hayes would retain sole ownership of this specific item, valued at $500. Mr. Hayes accepted your offer." He let the words hang in the air. "You didn't just value it at $500, Ben continued, his voice precise and devastating. "You traded it. You traded a multi-million-dollar asset for a boat. You signed a binding agreement to that effect. You cannot now, upon discovering you made a bad deal, claim you are entitled to the asset you willingly and formally relinquished. You disavowed it. It is no longer marital property. It is his." The finality of it was absolute. It wasn't just that they had undervalued the asset, they had actively traded it away. Clara's face crumpled. The reality was too immense, too catastrophic. The boat. She had fought for the boat, gloated about the boat, and in doing so she had handed Alex the keys to a kingdom. The irony was so cruel, so poetic, it was almost unbearable. "No," she whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. "Alex, please, you can't do this. After all our years together, you can't just take everything." It was a stunning reversal. She, who had just moments ago been prepared to leave him with virtually nothing, was now accusing him of taking everything. The moral mirror was now showing her a reflection she could not bear to see. Alex finally spoke, and for the first time, a hint of the deep well of pain he had stored for years was present in his voice. It wasn't angry, but it was heavy with the weight of memory. "Take everything, Clara?" he asked, his voice low. "Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the 10 years of family dinners where your father called my life's passion pretty little pictures. Let's talk about your brother mocking me at every holiday, asking if I'd solved the energy crisis from the garage yet. Let's talk about the parties in our own home where you and your friends would discuss my lack of ambition while I was standing in the next room." He was creating the list of grievances, not for them, but for himself, and for the truth of the room. "You talk about our years together," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I gave you my years. I gave you my loyalty. I gave you my love. And when your family belittled me, when they dismissed my dreams, when they treated me like a court jester, you were silent. Your silence was your vote, Clara. You voted with them, every single time." He stood up, his presence suddenly filling the room. "You didn't just take the house and the boat. You tried to take my dignity. You and your family tried to convince me that my work, my worth, was nothing. The only difference between then and now is this piece of paper." He tapped the bank statement. "This doesn't change the value of my work. It only changes your perception of it, and that is the heart of the problem." He looked at her, his eyes clear and devoid of hatred. There was only a profound, irrevocable sadness. "The settlement you propose is the one you will receive. I will not contest you keeping the house, the art, or the friends you curated, and you will keep the boat. I insist." He picked up his folders. "Ben has the signed papers, the original ones. Have a good life, Clara." And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of their arrogance. He didn't look back. The weeks that followed the disastrous mediation were a slow-motion collapse for the Sterling family. The story, in its delicious, karmic detail, inevitably leaked. It became the talk of the exclusive clubs and charity galas that formed the bedrock of their social world. The narrative was just too perfect. The arrogant real estate mogul and his haughty daughter, outsmarted by the quiet, unassuming son-in-law they had openly despised. Richard Sterling, a man who had built his reputation on his killer instinct for value, became a cautionary tale, a punchline whispered behind manicured hands. The financial fallout was secondary to the humiliation. Richard's business partners started looking at him differently, with a new, unwelcome flicker of doubt in their eyes. If he could be so blind to a multi-million-dollar opportunity right under his own roof, what else was he missing? The foundation of his authority, which was built on an image of infallibility, had been cracked. The fracture within the family itself was far more severe. The unified front they had presented to the world shattered into a million pieces of blame. Clara was inconsolable, but her grief quickly curdled into a bitter, directionless rage. She lashed out at everyone. She blamed her father. "You told me he was nothing," she screamed at him during one of many explosive arguments in his cavernous study. "You told me his project was a toy. You're the great Richard Sterling. How could you not see it?" Richard, wounded in his pride and his wallet, roared back. "I saw a man with no ambition, a man who let me insult him at my own dinner table for a decade. How was I to know he had a spine, let alone a golden goose hidden in the garage? You were his wife. You lived with him. How could you not know?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Because she had known, in a way. She had known about his passion, his dedication, his late nights. She had simply chosen to define it as a flaw rather than a strength. Her fury then turned on her brother Marcus, who had been her biggest cheerleader in the humiliation of Alex. "And you," she spat, "with your jokes about the perpetual motion machine. You thought it was all so funny. Are you laughing now, Marcus?" Marcus, stripped of his father's confident shadow, could only retreat into sullen silence. Even Lawrence Adler was not spared. Clara fired him in a tirade so vitriolic it became legendary in the city's legal circles. She hired a new law firm, a team of pit bulls tasked with finding any possible loophole to break the settlement. They found none. Ben Carter's work had been too clean, too precise. The agreement was ironclad. Alex's acceptance of her initial, insulting offer was the very thing that made it unbreakable. Clara was legally bound to the deal she had so arrogantly crafted. She was the architect of her own financial ruin. Alex, by contrast, moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. He didn't engage with the drama. He didn't answer Clara's frantic, pleading, and then abusive calls and texts. He simply had Ben Carter handle all communication. He was focused on the future, a future that was unfolding with breathtaking speed. He moved out of the sterile corporate apartment he'd been staying in and bought a stunning penthouse loft downtown, a space with soaring ceilings and vast windows overlooking the city skyline. It was a space for thinking, for creating. He threw himself into his work at Croft Kinetic, not with the frantic energy of a man newly rich, but with the focused passion of an artist finally given an unlimited canvas. The KRC-1 prototype, the old engine, was carefully transported from the suburban garage to the state-of-the-art R&D lab at Croft Industries. Seeing it there, under the brilliant lights of the facility, surrounded by a team of the world's best engineers who treated it with a reverence bordering on awe, was a moment of profound vindication for Alex. These were his people. This was his language. For the first time in his professional life, he felt completely, utterly at home. Julian Croft became more than a mentor. He became a friend. One evening, as they were overlooking the city from Alex's new loft, a glass of whiskey in hand, Julian asked the question that lingered. Do you ever feel the urge to gloat? To drive by her house in a new sports car? To make sure she knows just how wrong she was? Alex considered the question, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The thought occurs, he admitted honestly. There's a part of the human ego that craves that kind of validation. But what would it accomplish? She and her family don't operate on the level of ideas or principles. They only understand the language of status and dominance. Any attempt to communicate on that level would just be sinking to theirs. The best thing I can do is live my life, do my work, and be happy. That is a language they will never understand, which makes it the most complete victory of all. Croft nodded, a look of deep respect on his face. You're a better man than I am, Alex. I'm not sure about that, Alex replied. I just had a very long, very painful education in what truly matters. The most difficult choice fell to Clara. Her lawyers, having failed to break the settlement, presented her with the grim reality. The value of the house, the art, and her portfolio was substantial, but it was dwarfed by what she had lost. Worse, the lifestyle she was accustomed to, the boat, the clubs, the casual luxury, was incredibly expensive to maintain. For the first time in her life, she had to confront a budget. She had to make choices. The first choice was the most symbolic. The Sea Dancer, the boat that had been her ultimate prize, was now an albatross around her neck. The docking fees, the insurance, the maintenance, it was a constant bleeding drain on her finances. With a bitterness that tasted like ash, she was forced to put it up for sale. The vessel that had represented her victory now became the symbol of her catastrophic miscalculation. The day it was sold, she felt a hollowing out inside her. The loss not just of an object, but of an entire identity. She was no longer Clara Sterling, the woman who had everything. She was just a woman who had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Months bled into a year. The city skyline began to change, as it always does. On the north side of town, a new skyscraper began its ascent into the clouds. It was the first building in the world to be designed from the ground up with the Croft Kinetic core at its heart. The project was a global sensation in the architectural and environmental communities. It was hailed as the dawn of a new era in construction, a true green building that didn't just conserve energy, but actively generated it from its own existence. Alex stood on the observation deck of a neighboring building, looking at the steel skeleton of his dream taking shape. He was no longer just Alex Hayes, the quiet architect. He was a name, a force in the industry. He gave talks at universities. His articles were published in prestigious journals, and his firm, Croft Kinetic, was inundated with offers from around the world. He had everything he had ever been told he couldn't have: success, respect, and wealth beyond measure. But he found that those things were not the true prize. The prize was the work itself, the joy of creation, the satisfaction of solving a beautiful problem. One crisp autumn afternoon, he received an unexpected letter. It wasn't from a lawyer. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant, familiar. It was from Clara. His first instinct was to throw it away, unopened. His new life was peaceful, uncluttered by the ghosts of the past. But curiosity, or perhaps a final, lingering thread of the man he used to be, stayed his hand. He opened it. The letter was short. It wasn't an apology, not in the way he would have expected. There were no excuses, no blame shifted to her father or her brother. It was a simple, stark admission. "Alex," it began, "I drive by the new Croft Tower sometimes. I read an article about you, about the engine. They called you a visionary. And I realize they were right. You always were. I was just too blind to see it. I surrounded myself with shiny things, and I couldn't see the light that was right beside me all along. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I didn't understand its value. Not the money, you. I hope you are happy. You've earned it." It was signed simply, Clara. Alex read the letter twice. There was no request for forgiveness, no plea for a second chance. It was a confession, a statement of fact. For the first time, she had seen the truth, not because a bank statement told her to, but because she had finally looked at the world through a different lens. The moral mirror he had held up to her had finally shown her a true reflection, and she had not looked away. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't a key to the past, but a quiet closing of a door. It didn't change anything, and yet it changed everything. The anger, the resentment, the deep well of pain he had carried for so long, he realized it was gone, replaced by a calm, quiet peace. Her admission had not given him anything he didn't already have, but it had unburdened him of a weight he had been carrying for her. He looked out his window at the city, at the tower that was his testament. He thought about value. He thought about how some people see it only in price tags and brand names, in the gleam of a new boat or the size of a house. They spend their lives acquiring things, polishing surfaces, but remain empty inside. True worth, he now understood completely, was not something you could own. It was something you built. It was built in quiet hours of dedication. It was built with integrity. It was built through the courage to believe in your own vision, even when the world tells you it's worthless junk. Clara had taken the boat, but he had the horizon, and he was finally sailing toward it. This story is a powerful reminder that our true value is not determined by the opinions of others, especially those who judge us by superficial standards. It's a testament to patience, integrity, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. The most profound victories aren't loud and boastful. They are the quiet, inevitable result of dedication and self-respect. What did you think of Alex's ultimate decision? Was it justice, or was it mercy? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments section below. Your perspectives make this community what it is. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If you found this story of vindication as satisfying as I did, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more stories that empower and inspire. Until next time, remember to value the substance over the shine, and never let anyone else define your worth.